so that what cannot be shaken may remain. What are your foundations? What are your foundations? In consistory, our leadership, our leadership body, we've been raising some questions and questioning some of our foundations and some of the ways that we do things here. One of the questions that's come up is, why do people come and worship here for a while and then maybe don't come back? Well, I've theorized about this. Not that my theory is the correct one or the answer, but it is a theory at least. And generally, it's my observation that people come to a church because something isn't going quite right in their lives. Either something is missing or there's a crisis with which it would be nice to know that God, or at least some of God's people, might lend a hand or a shoulder or a listening ear. And these crises come on in a broad range of a critical spectrum, from news of bad health to grief and depression to drug use to relationship issues to maybe just finding a mate. But once the crisis is averted, motivation wanes, the church still remains. And in this sense, the church serves as the foundation that isn't shaken. It is the one thing that people can count on to be here. But it raises some questions for me and makes me wonder what happened with the woman in Luke's story. And what's the foundation Jesus is talking about? Notice that there's a contrast between being a solid foundation in the community, which this church appears to be, a church building, contrasted with the ministries that are happening within it, contrasted with the way healing is offered in this story from Luke. Now, I preface our looking at the story from Luke by reminding us that there are times in Jesus' ministries we get stories of in the gospel where Jesus goes, his healing looks similar to the healing that we offer here at Trinity. For example, Zacchaeus, the story of Zacchaeus seeks out Jesus much the way people might seek out a church. The way that many LGBT people have sought out Trinity because they've heard about it through Facebook or sought a church on gaychurch.org, or the way people come to our church for food and shelter in one of the ministries, or the way people find our building because of being in Alcoholics Anonymous and one of the programs that's here 3 times a week, or in yoga. Some people seek us out because they're looking for something that's saying there's good news for you here. But this story in Luke provides another approach to being heralds of good news. Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and there's a woman who's bent over. Who else is in the story? Tell me, let's process this story a bit. Who are the characters in this story?
The other church hierarchy.
Oh, the synagogue, the ruler of the synagogue, there's other people in the synagogue. There's the woman who's been over for 18 years. There's Jesus who's there. And what are they doing? Well, the synagogue was a place for teaching and for prayers and for being together and getting help from each other, supporting each other. Not unlike what we do in a church today. What do you know about this woman in the story? We don't know a lot about her, do we? We know that she was a woman. We know that, or if she is happy, she contains it well. She's bent over. And in our discussion group this morning, I had the class stand up. You can't do it here because we got all these pews in here. I had them stand up and bend over. Now you can imagine this, but I have to tell you that imagining it as I did in preparation for this sermon was different from doing it this morning ourselves in the discussion group. But I mean, bending over number one, you can't see my face, and I can't see yours. About the only thing I can see like this is the floor, and I tend to run into things if I'm not careful because my peripheral vision isn't very good either. It's been impaired. That's a difficult way to go about one's life. For 18 years this happens, or has been happening. So she's in the story in this way. Jesus calls out to her, sees her, calls out to her. I mean, I wonder how many times she'd been in the synagogue before. Had anybody ever called out to her? I began to think about how we do ministry here. We're a bit passive in it. We're here, we have programs, we hope people will come in. But when they do, what do we do? I think about our booth at Pride Charlotte, and with that booth we're going out to some degree into the community. But even there, we're often only passively waiting for someone to stop by our booth and hand them a flyer. Yesterday it was a bit different because Tyler Williams patiently sat for hours drawing on henna tattoos. And a lot of people stopped by for the good news of a tattoo. It was good news to them. They were happy about it. But even so, I wonder if we actually see the people who come through our doors or by our booth. And if so, how well do we know them? How do we get to know them? Because on this occasion, in the story in Luke, Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he sees a woman bent over for 18 years, and he calls over to her and announces good news to her. And the good news is you are set free from your ailment. What had her bent over for 18 years? Verse 11 says, a spirit. Which tells me that, well, one, where do we suppose that spirit came from? But it tells me in that it's a spirit, or identified as a spirit here in verse 11, that we might imagine it being a spirit of her society. 2,000 years ago, women were not treated so well. Perhaps her society had pressed her down for many years as a girl and a young woman. And we might imagine that were she here today, she would find herself fully equal and standing tall. We might imagine that, but it would be just that, our imaginations, because it still isn't true today, 2,000 years later. A new report from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta says it's startling. 1 in 4 women surveyed by the government say they were violently attacked by their husbands or boyfriends. 1 in 4. That's in this country. That's not somewhere over there. 25%. 1 in 4 women you see walking down the street. The experts in domestic violence don't find that alarming. They see it all the time. They deal with it every day over at CVAN. The government official who oversaw the research found it astounding. Some are even questioning the legitimacy of it, but I suspect it's probably even a greater number than that because people tend to underreport violence. As many as 29 million women say they've suffered severe and frightening physical violence from a boyfriend, spouse, or other intimate partner. That includes being choked, beaten, stabbed, shot, punched, slammed against something, or hurt by hair pulling. If you include slapping, pushing, and shoving, the number grows to 36 million. In this country. Just in this country. Almost half the women who reported rape or attempted rape said it happened before they were 17 years old. As As many as 1 in 3 women, 33 1/3%, have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetimes. And women who've been menaced or attacked in these ways report more health problems. Bent over. Female victims in particular had significantly higher rates of irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, frequent headaches, and difficulty sleeping. Bent over. More and more people are saying this is something we need to pay attention to. Jesus often, how do we pay attention to it? What do we do with this information? What do we do with what's happening to women still in our society today? Jesus often healed persons by addressing the underlying social conditions that create illness of body and spirit, as in this passage. Bruce and Catherine Epperly, who were touch healers, say Jesus healed by loving people into health and by listening them into life. By loving and listening. It's time we, like Jesus, start addressing those underlying social conditions that create illness of body and spirit. Where society had erected barriers and where the religious ways constructed of unbending rules and where their own minds created confusion, Jesus provided a way by which they could not be separated from His care. What do you suppose separates those out there from our care? Could it be that what our society needs most right now from the church, this church and every church, is to hear our voice in the public square? Because if we say we follow the way of Jesus, then sometimes at least we're going to have to go out of our way to offer the way of God's love to them. It may just be our attitude toward those in need. It may just be we don't see them, like the people in the synagogue maybe didn't see her for 18 years. Hard to believe. It may be we just are afraid of them or of losing our friends because of caring for them. But the way of God's love in this passage, displayed in this passage, the most powerful love I can find. Of course, it's a risky venture, going out of our way to offer the way of God's inseparable love. People may take advantage of us or of you. People may come for a while and leave. People may not be ready for love like that. But think about your own self. What really matters in your life? Is it the way of your job? Is it the way of financial well-being? Is it the way of political idealism? Is it the way of giving a pittance to assuage guilt? Unless I'm terribly off base, I'm guessing that what really matters to you is what matters to me and matters to us all, is that to know that somebody loves you and cares about you and will not let you go. That's a powerful way. This past week, on Tuesday, sorry about that. This past week on Tuesday, Michael Hill walked into the McNair Discovery Learning Center in Decatur, Georgia with an automatic rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition. Did you hear that story? Since Sandy Hook last year, and there have been others since, we as a society have debated the ins and outs of gun control and gun violence and who should be held responsible and whether schools should have armed guards. I don't remember a single conversation in all those conversations in the media about those things in which anyone suggested that the power of love might provide even a remotely possible solution to the violence in our society. Love is that thing we talk about in church on Sundays that Jesus did, but that during the week we're hard-pressed to do because society is not structured that way, and we're inclined to conclude with Tina, what's love got to do with it? In Luke and in Decatur, Georgia, love has everything to do with it. Enter Antoinette Tuff, a school bookkeeper who was the one there when Michael Hill came into the office. She was heard to say to the 911 people, "He don't care if he dies. He don't have nothing to live for." He said that to her. "Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me." But she listened and talked him into life. "It's going to be all right, sweetie," she said. "I just want you to know I love you, though, okay? And I'm proud of you. That's a good thing. You've just given up. Don't worry about it." You think she wasn't scared? You think she was in a risky situation? This kind of transformative love is that way. It goes into those places of risk and difficulty where we're going to find ourselves afraid. She didn't want to be in that situation. No one wants to be in that situation. But being in it, she found strength and love, and like Jesus, she saw Michael Hill and saw inside him, and saw someone alone and hurting and in need. And seeing inside him, maybe she also saw inside the soul of our society. And in her act of love, endangered love, she gave a victory to the good and hope, maybe even to God. This time, love trumped guns. I believe love will trump sexism and sex abuse that's still prevalent in our society 2,000 years later. Love will trump racism, still prevalent 50 years after the historic march on Washington, D.C. and Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. Love will trump greed and racism, and love will trump the extreme and immoral ways of unbending idealism we see in our state legislature, where those with the most grab for more, and the least of these get treated like the worst of all. And time would fail to tell of the treatment of teachers in public education in our state. Who knows how many students will be bent over in the next generation because of the unbending ways of our current political regime. But love will trump extreme, immoral evil if we act out of love. If good people do good. Love bends the rules of unbending ways and creates a path where there was no way. But love has to go into that place and see the person in need, call out to them and challenge the systems of injustice that put them there in the first place. That love is the foundation that cannot be shaken. That which cannot be shaken. Not created things, they'll always be shaken. This building will be shaken. It's already shaken. Isn't it, John? It's shaking and it's leaking. And one day, maybe a long day off, this building will crumble. No matter what we do to it. What will remain after it's gone are the words and acts of love that set people free and set things right. Words and acts of Jesus' love that happen here will remain. Let our foundation be unshakable love. So let it be. Amen. Our hymn of faith, How Firm a Foundation. It's number 407. I invite you to stand as we sing.